Hey, Keith. Jesus. Hey, Keith, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I heard you swear just a second ago.
Just making sure you're awake.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Historic Preservation Commission meeting. We're going to call the meeting to order for this Monday, May 20th, 2024 meeting. And we're going to begin with a roll call.
Awesome. Okay, Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Beauchamp,
Here.
Commissioner Whitten. Here. Commissioner Keller,
Here.
Vice Chair Berg.
Here. We can approve tonight's agenda if somebody would like to make a motion to do so.
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
And do we have any public comments on items not on tonight's agenda? And can you please state your name and city of residence? Okay.
Andy Johnson, DAJ Design, here in Louisville. I wanted to do a quick follow-up since this wasn't an agenda item for 1, 2, 3, 4 Jefferson that we talked about online last month. So just to remind you, this is the front of the house. Looking at it from the north side, then the south side. This is that stone kind of wainscot on the outside that wrapped just the front and pretty much stopped right at the northwest corner. We did a little digging away to help you see what was going on. And so this is an image of the interior inside the original home. So it's really, what we can tell is that it's the first front building was the original, and then we think that it actually went into a little bit of an L to the back. But when you dig away and you kind of see what's in there, if you look at the image to the right, you'll see there's a post coming up out of the ground and the floor joist is running right alongside of it. That is the foundation. It was a post and beam foundation. The board that's right behind that post, that's holding dirt and water and stuff from getting inside the crawl space. That's it. That's all there was. And so the stone is right on the other side of that in this image. Looking at this image, there's a little bit better close-up of that kind of post and beam system. The image on the left is taken along the north wall of the interior of that building. And then, by the way, this looks a lot better on my screen than up there, but what you're looking at is kind of the entire north wall in the right image. So you can see this original building was basically like a post and beam. Down in the crawl space, it gets even more fun. We have stone and brick and kind of concrete filling in certain parts. Really hard to tell the date on some of this. It definitely was additive, but they kind of came in the back portion with either stone or a combination of that post and beam system and stone as infill. This building would have been impossible to move, and it would have been nearly impossible to put a foundation under. So anyway, I wanted to give you that opportunity to see just how awesome it was. So I realize you're not able to ask any questions, but that's the end of my presentation. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have two public hearings this evening. The first is a request to find probable cause for a landmark designation to allow for funding of a historic structure assessment for 1440 Cannon Street. And staff will present information on that structure.
Okay. My screen sharing is paused. Okay. Try this again. Are you all seeing it on your iPads? No, right? Yeah, I'm
Nope.
getting something that says it's paused, which I've never seen before. Let's see if that helps. Okay. Okay. Okay, still says that it's paused. So I'm gonna try to log out of this real quick and try to share again. And then if that doesn't work, I have a copy of the slides. We can do something else, but just give me one minute, sorry. Okay, you're the host. I'm gonna leave and then I'm gonna come. Does that work? Okay. Okay. You said it worked for you. Two, 287. Okay, so that did not work. All right. I think. Have you seen this? Or I think we could just like print it all out, to be honest. We've done that before.
There we go.
Perfect.
It's a mystery. Okay. All right, thank you so much, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Okay. It's a probable cause hearing for 1440 Cannon Street. Just a brief reminder here that the probable cause hearings are how the commission assesses whether they want to issue a grant for an assessment. Up to $4,000 reimbursed for residential properties and $9,000 for commercial properties. They are reimbursements, but they're non-matching grants, and the criteria is basically the landmarking criteria. So for this one, we've got the conditions over time. Up top is the 1958 assessor's card image, and I know that's a little weird. It's usually 1948, but I did double check. It is actually the 1958 record, and so you can tell from there that the house itself hasn't really changed. It looks like that front picture window has probably been replaced. This is probably the original sighting, certainly the original form from at least the 1958 image. But this building was actually constructed in 1908. So of course, this isn't its original form. So it's about 116 years old. It shows the national style, which we're all very familiar with. One of the interesting things about this area, it's in Little Italy, and it does have that sort of shotgun national form. And so in a few cases, that's actually been an indication that the house was brought over from a mine. But in this case, it doesn't look like there's a history with that there. But anyway, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is most definitely from a local mine. But it doesn't look like that's the case. However, it certainly has a long social significance, 119 years of Italian and Italian-American ownership within the Little Italy neighborhood. And then there's actually a ton of interesting stuff on this property. It's really well documented, and there's saloons, there's gambling, there's coal mining, all sorts of really interesting things associated with this building. And so staff is recommending finding of probable cause, which would approve up to $4,000 toward the cost of that assessment. The applicants are here. They do not have a presentation, but they'd be welcome or happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for staff?
No.
Thank you, staff, and thank you, everybody attending in person or potentially online for your patience. Do we have questions for the applicants?
Maybe just one. The foundation looks extremely in great condition. Well, it looks updated, in fact. Is it a newer foundation by chance?
Can you please just state your name and city of residence?
Bob Musselwhite, Louisville. The foundation was replaced at some point. It's actually concrete blocks and slabs. When we bought the house about 14 years ago, we had a structural engineer look at the foundation. And at that point, he thought it was in pretty good shape and nothing really to worry about. So it's unlike a lot of the houses which just have rubble from that time period. So that's actually one of the reasons why we think it's worthwhile to maybe keep the house in its somewhat original shape and try to keep it up.
Thank you.
So the commissioners will now discuss the request for probable cause.
This one seems pretty simple to me. I mean, I think it meets all the criteria. I would agree with staff's recommendation for the HSA.
Yeah, I agree, I love it.
I think it's really exciting to see a property in Caledonia Place. I don't feel there's an abundance of landmarked properties there. And this has a really rich social history. I mean, I loved hearing about the mining experience, the political activism, and the Fuel Fiends Club from the 50s from the one resident there. So I think I agree, it easily meets all the criteria. I'm happy to see the city invest in an HSA to learn more about the property. So we can make a motion if somebody would like to.
I'll make a motion to approve the probable cause for 1440 Cannon Street.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Beauchamp?
Yes.
Commissioner Whidden?
Yes.
Commissioner Keller?
Yes.
Vice Chair Berg?
Yes. The motion has been approved. Staff will be working with you on the next steps of the HSA, and we look forward to seeing that once it's completed. So thank you for looking into this program. We very much appreciate that. You're welcome. The next item for review this evening is a request to find probable cause for a landmark designation to allow for funding of an HSA assessment for 900 Main Street, which is a commercial property. Staff will do their presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So probable cause, 900 Main Street, just a block north of us, 2 blocks north of us. So this one's a pretty interesting structure. So the image on the left is from 1950 assessor's card. You can kind of see the footprint. Actually, you can really see it really well in the top right photo that still exists today. But there's been additions to the north and then also to the east. However, both of them are older than 50 years. I'd have to look up which is which, but I think the one on the north is the first one, and then the one on the east is the second. One is like 1953, the other is 1973, something in there. So certainly the footprint's changed, but it's been older than 50 years. As you can see, the siding is completely different. And in fact, the stucco is actually a pretty recent addition in the last few years. And then also the windows have changed on all sides. And then one thing just to note as well, this is described in your social history report, but this building is from the 1955. Clearly something's wrong there for the 1950 assessor's card and the 1955, so I have to double check those numbers. But it's from the middle of the century. But previous to this building, which was built as a post office, was actually a gas station. It was a completely different building that was there before. So certainly this location has been part of Main Street for a longer period of time, but not with this particular building. So the age of the building is at least 50 years old. I can double check when I get off of here when it was actually built. But then the architectural significance, so this is what our commercial context calls a residential style commercial building, which is really interesting. It doesn't have a history though of being used as a residence like some of the other ones in town do. It seems like it was built as a post office in that form. As I noted, there have been some changes. The additions are older than 50 years. And then the social significance here is diverse. It's really interesting. There's a long commercial history, starting with the post office. It was also a clothing store. Parts of it have been a flower shop and offices, all sorts of retail. So certainly has a pretty rich and continuous up until today history of downtown businesses. So staff recommends a finding of probable cause, which would approve up to $9,000, given that this is a commercial building, toward the cost of a historic structure assessment. The applicants are here. I believe that one of them does have a presentation, and then I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions for staff?
No.
I do have a question. So thank you for noting that the additions to the original structure to the north and the east are both within 50 years. Does the permit file show when the windows were first changed, especially on the west facing, and then the addition of the south facing window?
Yeah, I think when I looked in the permit file, I didn't find really anything that talked about the windows or the siding. So I think that would be where the assessment comes in to know when those changes were made.
And then for the HSA that we're considering, the staff report does list it as one, this is 900 Main Street, but then the north and east additions have separate addresses. All of those would be part of the HSA, just to clarify?
Yep, exactly.
Correct. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have the applicant here, as well as the owner. And can you please state your name and city of residence?
Andy Johnson, DAJ Design here in Louisville. So I am joined by Jeff Rakes, who is representing ownership of the property. And he can go over the history that that building has had within his family. I have known this building for a long time. We've, I like many of you, have probably been in a lot of these businesses over the years. Certainly over the last 20 years. At first glance, it's a really, it is an interesting building. It's on a corner, which is fun to have a commercial building come before us that's on a corner. We don't get as many of those opportunities. It had a lot of very quick changes is what it seems in reading the history. And the timing of everything that happened kind of sequentially right after this building was built is really interesting. We have been down in the crawl space a few times to try to like figure out, how this thing was built. And the brick that you see in that historic photo is still very apparent. And you can really get a good sense of that part of the building with the stairwell that goes down to the basement, which was seemingly built right at the same time, as opposed to have been dug out later on. There's some fun tunnel history with this building that we're looking forward to figuring out a little bit more about. Again, don't get those opportunities very often. We can hear about them a lot, but we don't actually get to like kick the tires on that one. And the postal question, I think, is just simply for the businesses all having their own address and separate mailings, but it is essentially one building, has been under one ownership. There was a part where the north property was purchased to build that addition way back when. Hopefully you've read the social history, that there used to be a gas station on this site, that it had many lives before this building happened. So I'm sure we'll find some of those remnants. We always seem to. So that's all I have to say. Happy to answer any questions, but I would like to invite Jeff up just to say a few words about the ownership of the building.
Please state your name and city of residence.
Hi, Jeff Rakes, Louisville. So thank you for this opportunity. Just really briefly, my family has a rich history. My dad used to be the head football coach at Louisville High School in the early 60s. And so having been living in this area for a long time and having this building in the family since 1980, there's been a lot of businesses that have been in and out of there. And want to thank you for the great research you did on the history. I mean, the thought that it was a gas station at one time is pretty amazing. It's pretty fun. As far as going through this process, we're excited about what else could be possibly done to help enrich downtown Louisville with businesses. And so I thank you for considering it.
Thank you.
So staff will now consider the probable cause request. I'm sorry, the commissioners will.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also really enjoyed reading about the history of the property and all the businesses have been in there and seeing the images of the gas station that came before and understanding all of the activity that's happened in that location on Main Street within Louisville. So it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah, likewise, I'm always a proponent of commercial properties. As Andy mentioned, a corner property is especially important, I think, for these downtown neighborhoods. So I agree with Sloan. Maybe one question for the applicant do you anticipate trying to expose the brick and bring it back to the original exterior?
So a few years ago, there was stucco. Short answer is at this point in time, no. There was stucco on the outside. A few years ago, we had it redone. And so it gave it a little bit of a facelift, as well as recent awnings as well. So, yeah.
Okay. And I think even with some of the window changes, it's still pretty evident what the original structure looked like, as well as the two additions on both sides.
And as was mentioned before, I think it'd be good to have the HSA to learn more about those changes and what can be uncovered and the condition of the different building materials. I do think it meets our criteria, the social significance, the architectural significance, which is unique given that it's commercial, that looks residential, and some good physical integrity. So I think I did not know the history either, that it was a gas station and that the photographer, set up shop there and is well known for all the photos in original Louisville. And I wonder, just for our commission, if there might be some opportunity in the future for some sort of, plaque there, or even if the property is renovated, some designation of that. Everybody, I think locals know it's been in multiple businesses, but its origin story is pretty unique. So, but I would be in support of the commercial HSA, the probable cause. Keith, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't have anything more elegant than what you guys already said. Thank you. I agree with everything.
Yeah, I'd say this one's pretty easy for me as well, so I'd make a motion to approve the probable cause for 900 Main Street.
I'll second.
So the probable cause has been approved for 900.
Vice Chair, we got to do roll call.
Roll call.
Commissioner Beauchamp,
Yes.
Commissioner Whitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Berg.
Yes. The probable cause for 900 Main Street has been approved. Staff will be in contact with you for the next steps in that process. Thank you. We are going to hear a work plan update on the grant program from staff.
Yes, okay. The long-awaited start to the grant program discussion. Okay, so to be totally honest, the way that I'm trying to set this up is that it's really open and that this is very beginning, and then I get some feedback from all of you about whether these directions are helpful, sort of confirming that we still want to go this route. And so this is a discussion direction formally, but it's pretty soft on the direction unless you really have something that direction you want to give me. But so checking in on your dais, there are the questions that were in the staff report. I've reordered them slightly, but that way you can take a look at them easily while I'm giving my presentation. And then just also before I start, some points for discussion that I think would be really helpful for us to talk about tonight in greater detail than we have before at the retreat. First of all, talking seriously about prioritizing commercial properties, to what extent. Those are pretty big numbers, right, as you saw. And so talking a little bit more seriously about whether that's of interest and what that might look like. I'd also like to check in that there's continued interest in the carve-out for restoration and structural grant options, separate from the sort of traditional or sort of whatever the standard path. Talking a little bit about the interest in allowing existing landmarks greater access to the grant program, and then also just what methods would be helpful for you all to see, for me to present like an estimate of the number of landmarks that might be upcoming. So I'm gonna do a little background. All of these tables were in your packet, but just to kind of get us on the same page. So I looked a little bit into slightly greater depth into revenue for the fund versus the expenditures. In general, I think we kind of already knew this, but what's going on here is that the grant fund, part of the fund, and the operating budget both are generally under what comes in a single year. And so that $3 million of unencumbered funds, which is probably like roughly $2.5 million when you think about the encumbrances, is not going anywhere, right? It's sort of sitting there. And so it's money to think about potentially for commercial or existing landmarks, or, really be strategic about it. Because, and so it's really tiny up here on the screen, sorry, but in your packet, you'd see that it's, for the last several years, it's been just under $1 million coming in from the sales tax. The other thing to note here is that, so the sales tax has that 10-year horizon, right? So it'll be up in 2028. We could take it to a vote if there's interest in trying to perpetuate the fund, the program in 2027. It could be 2029. It could be not exactly 2028, but that's when the sales tax revenue would cease if the voters don't, if we don't bring it back and they don't vote on it, right? So that's why I've used 4 years as kind of like a rough timeline to think about how to think about the fund in that time frame. Some other things. So I went back, and I don't think any of this is super surprising, but just to really see it in the numbers. So I went back through 2023, since that's, you know, we don't have to mess with the costs there. We know what these numbers mean. And so basically, you know, all of these projects that were approved and got grant funding last year all had some type of restoration or structural work in them. So it's really the scale that makes the difference between the big numbers and the small numbers, which is sort of self-evident, but it's good to see, right? And so scale in this case would be the 2 biggest residential ones, 2 biggest grants actually overall, were full foundation replacements. And so, for example, there was at least one that was like one corner of there's like a sister wall put in one corner of the one of the residential projects, and that actually came under the maximum 40,000 grant request. So again, it's really these huge, large scale, completely redoing the homes, taking them down to the studs and building them back up that really kind of cost those high numbers. Another thing though, right, is that last year we had 816 McKinley, which was landmarked I think a decade ago at least, that came in and successfully got a grant for almost $60,000. That's under the extraordinary circumstances language, maybe changing that, but it shows that those kinds of projects, there's like 60, 65 landmarks out there, potentially those are also something that could actually come in. Is that of interest to the commission to continue to support those kinds of projects? And then also, I'm going to flip to the next slide. These are the commercials. So this is commercial. It's not every single commercial one that's been approved, but I think it's missing like 1 or 2. And all of them are greater than the current $150,000 max. So I think at the minimum, $150,000 is probably not enough, right? But, you know, and I mean, enough, I guess that's again if you want to support the commercial projects. But I thought that was actually sort of interesting. I was expecting there to be a change over time, that previous to 2019 we would have seen things that were a little more comparable to that amount, but with the changes in inflation and costs over time, it's really, they're all pretty expensive, even regardless of some of those recent cost changes. And then the last thing is, so we talked about this a little bit at the retreat, was sort of trying to get a number of landmarks that the commission might be interested in targeting. So not just the actual landmarks themselves, but also, you know, how many landmarks over the next several years are we talking about, just to kind of try to help us with the numbers. So I did what I said I would. I went back and I tried to use the existing context for Old Town, noticed, of course, that those are only for Old Town, so we needed to branch out a little bit more, and came up with about 72 landmarks that might be of interest, strictly really from an architectural representation standpoint. I think that's pretty limited. I described why I thought so in the staff report. So there are other options that might be helpful, coming up with like a round number. We want to make it to 75 landmarks, or focusing on large-scale commercial projects could be options. If we wanted to just use sort of a hands-off approach, like I don't want to say not proactive, but the way that things have been done for the past few years, that would give us about 4 landmarks a year. That's basically what's been happening, other than 2020. 2020 was a wild year. There were 9 landmarks. I don't know what was going on. Okay, and then sorry, one more slide summarizing the report. So I did a little bit of digging to try to understand how much, like if the HPC wanted to have a carve out for restoration, like full restoration projects, full structural projects, what would those numbers look like? And so this is kind of my best estimate, just pulling out those specific project line items. And so I think in general, right, like the idea behind this is that these separate grant types could incentivize more restoration. So the commission has previously wanted to see full restoration projects when people have come in with sort of partial restoration projects. Awarding more money for those is one way to potentially incentivize that. I know also we regularly have very robust conversations about what extraordinary circumstances means. And so this could be a way of maybe sidestepping a little bit of those conversations as well. I do think that there are some other questions to be considered here. You know, is this really necessary to create an additional separate path if the overall grants are going to be increased? And then the other piece is this might be an opportunity to allow, if you do pursue this carve-out option, to allow existing landmarks to have access only to these grant types. It might be kind of a straightforward way of maybe promoting, you know, especially if they need structural work, trying to kind of protect them in perpetuity. So just to try to get us to a little bit of a conversation, I've sort of thrown out some wild ideas. And then, of course, like I said, you've got your questions. But so when we talk about prioritizing commercial buildings, like one way to look at that, and again, I've tried to give you a really big number just to give an estimate, but I think if we said there was a max of $500,000 for commercial properties, we actually probably would get a couple of the big commercial properties downtown, right? But then we'd run out of that grant pretty quickly. But that's one way to look at this is, okay, there are 2 or 3 big projects, you know, and I don't want to name any of them in particular, but you all can imagine which ones they might be that would cost that amount, that would be attractive, and that could be one of the focus points for the next 4 years. Another potential way to look at this is that you want to prioritize as many new residential landmarks as you possibly can, if that's of value. Raising that maximum but not having carve-outs, right? So not having other options that might cost more. Certainly improving existing landmarks. We can work on the language if that's of interest. Another thing, you know, getting wild here, like we could sunset some of these provisions if we wanted to focus on a couple of commercial projects but didn't want to make it so that these huge numbers were available after 2028 or after 2026. So again, just trying to sort of get a little bit of concrete concepts out there so that you all can start discussing the implications of some of these things that came up at that January retreat. So I know this is always the painful part. If you would transition to your sheets, you can talk about whatever you'd like, but if you need a place to start, I'm very curious about the feedback on the commercial buildings in particular. Now that you've seen some of those numbers, what does that look like for you all?
I could definitely see increasing the grant for commercial projects to incentivize them. 500,000 seems quite a bit to me. And I could see our pot going down pretty quick. But I could be on board for increasing those grants.
What I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, is most of them were under 200,000, but north of 150. Is that right?
There was one big one, right?
Well, there's one big one, but the
Right.
rest of them. So maybe increasing it, but not 500,000, increasing it so that it encompasses what we would anticipate like a typical cost actually being.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I really, commercial versus residential, I don't know if I lean one way or the other, to be honest on it. I can tell you, looking at, just even bringing up 900 Main from today, you look right next door to 908 Main, and you're like, oof. I would like to encourage that not to happen again, because I think that's like one of the 2 or 3 eyesores on our main street. So I understand wanting to look at commercial a little bit more. It makes sense on that front. And a lot of times somebody will come in on a commercial side and try to maximize a property pretty quick like that. And that's kind of the setup that seems to happen out of that.
I want to see a balance between commercial and residential. I think commercial, adds a lot to our town, high visibility and visitors. So I want to see it prioritized. I think because the money could go quite quickly, there somehow, we should just give thought to like a cap there. And, you know, what are really the priorities for a property to get the funds, and what is the cap on the funds for that? Because I think the other two are good priorities as well. I think it's important to continue the investment in properties we've already invested in, existing landmarks. But I also really believe there's a lot of properties that have yet to be landmarked, and that provides that first protection, which is so essential. So I wouldn't want to divert funds too much to commercial and shoring up existing landmarks and not have money, you know, left for things that will protect a good deal of residential properties. I don't know if that's helpful, because I'm saying everything's a priority, but I don't want to put too much towards commercial, I guess, is kind of the main takeaway there.
We did run into a case recently where the applicant withdrew, is that correct? Because the funds were not enough?
Well, if are you thinking about the residents?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And I don't have a lot of questions on this because I don't have a lot of background yet on how we would structure it in the code. But I think my understanding of what happened there was more the funds were not available on the matching side. So it was not so much a question that the money that the city was offering like wasn't enough for the project to cover half the project. It was that she was going to struggle to do the scope of project that the HPC wanted because of what she was going to have to pay. And so that's where, I mean, that it wouldn't solve that exact issue necessarily, but that's where, you know, in the staff report, there's that section about income qualified grants. I'm continuing to pursue those. That's a little bit of a different, I have no experience writing a code with those kinds of things. And so I'm trying to understand like practically what that would look like, although it's doable. It's just how to do it. So things, and I'm happy to hear what you all think, but the things that we've come up with so far, I think are potential support for the tax implications, right? Because that's another thing. If somebody gets a $50,000 or $100,000 grant from the city, that goes in as their income, and so they have to pay taxes on that, and that's a huge barrier for people who, I mean, if you're going, you know, some people that doesn't change, but for some people it absolutely does. And so that is one big issue. And then the other issue that's come up is lack of design support. So people not being able to afford somebody to actually get them through this process. And so those are the two that I'm trying to look at, if there's a way to do income qualified to access those two types of grants. But there could be a way too to do something where it's like 75% covered or something as well, if that's of interest, which would help, I think, the specific one that you're thinking of.
I think all of those are really worthy goals, because I imagine that some of those homes, if they had financial support for architectural designs and doing this whole process, and as well for, you know, matching funds, additional funds that are income-based perhaps, we might see potentially more projects that keep original structures intact instead of larger additions and maximizing square footage on the property. And maybe that's just sort of my assumption, maybe I'm off base there, but I do think those are really worthy uses of worth looking into and putting some funds towards.
I just want to check that's of interest to everybody, right? Okay. I would probably do it anyway, but I just want to make sure.
And Keith, please feel free to jump in anytime.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, first off, Amelia, thank you for putting this together for us. I think it's very helpful having these numbers and kind of a rule of thumb on how much it costs for residential and commercial. I'd like to see a balance of both commercial and residential, like Chrissy said, and also raise the max. So I would agree with all those. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, it'd be interesting to see what the inflation numbers and everything were from 2019 to today, and just see what that equates to, just to even have a launch point.
Yeah, so I did something totally terrible in the staff report, and when I just used like the consumer price index inflation, which is nonsense for this context. But it does give you some idea. I mean, that's where I got the concept that it's 150,000. Everything is over $150,000 if you use it in today's dollars, right? But yeah, I mean, there's totally a better way to do that I can come back with like a 5% every year kind of approach to give you more real numbers. But in the heat of the moment, I just threw that one in there.
I mean, that, for me, if I'm just looking at stuff, that'd be a baseline to start with, and then adjust from there if we felt like it still wasn't meeting what we thought it would meet. And again, there's others on the board that have been around longer, so I would lean on there.
No, I agree with that, like the baseline approach for, you know, all the different, like today we talked about the HSAs, you know, commercial and residential, and then we've got the loan and the different grants, and all of them just need to be increased to a decent degree.
And I would say the COVID years did blow things up quite a bit, and I don't think they've ever really, it's kind of like anything, it never really comes back down, it just flattens out a bit. You never see it actually get back down to where it probably would have been without it. So I think there's a larger inflation there too.
Yeah.
When was the last time the grants were adjusted?
2019.
I think it's 2019.
And I would just say for those of you who are a little newer, I would not rely too heavily on those numbers, honestly. That's partly why I was trying to give you the real project costs. It's because I think that just having been there for it, like there was a time, there's a way in which those are just round numbers, which is probably where we're gonna get as well. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that there's a way that we just go, oh yeah, 40,000, okay, then let's bring it to 60 now and call it a day. Because I don't think the 40 is really like super solid base to start with, to be totally honest.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Just let's get there and then adjust and have the conversation at that point.
So another thing that just came up in this conversation was the existing landmarks. I think you mentioned it, Chrissy. What other people think about existing landmarks? Do you want me to try to bring you something that allows them greater access? Do you want to continue what we have now, which is they have to basically prove a greater need? I'm just curious about that piece as well.
The one you mentioned that came back for additional work, which was great. It was great to see, and it was approved. But I don't think we've had many others, at least not since I've been on here. So I don't know that, I guess the existing landmarks know that's an option.
So we have had that one grant for 816 McKinley. I actually think we've had, I know at least 2, maybe 3 probable causes that have been for existing landmarks that have come through to get future access. So they haven't come through for grant requests, but I do know that we probably have some coming down the pike that are going to be similar to 816 McKinley.
And there'd be sort of structural or restoration, like structural work?
For at least one of them, I know it's structural work. I can't really remember the other. But yeah, I mean, so because they're eligible for the assessments, right? Because they didn't have one previous, and then they want to come in under extraordinary circumstances to ask to do structural work or full restoration, that kind of thing.
Can I ask, is there something, if I recall, that they have to come, if you landmarked, you had to come back within 5 years to be able to get funds if it wasn't extraordinary circumstances or something?
It's actually it's 3 years.
3 years, okay. Mm-hmm.
Did we waive that though in that one? I remember it getting complicated because I can't remember. Maybe
for 816 McKinley, or
yeah.
So yeah, it's a little funky. So there's a clause that I'm not aware that we've used, although maybe it has been pulled out, where you can ask for an extension from the 3 years. But what happened with 816 McKinley was there's that separate section of the resolution that says you can come in and ask for money under extraordinary circumstances if you've already maxed out the funds that you were originally approved under. So let's say theirs was like $10,000, they'd already gotten the $10,000 for something else, they can come through under extraordinary circumstances at any time. And that's true for any landmark, right? Once you're beyond the 3 years. So it's not directly about the timeline, but it ends up in effect being. I'm happy to pull up the resolution too, if that's clearer, but yeah.
Seems like the original question stands of how do we feel about continuing and increasing the grant for those for those properties.
Yeah.
And I would think, it all kind of needs to be looked at as a whole, because it would be great to continue the grant for them and increase that grant, because they are historic homes and they, we've already invested in them. We've recognized the value to the city. As they age, they need more repairs, or maybe they never did the repairs in the first place, or did the HSA. But I think that all the grants, the increases need to be looked at as a whole. As we can imagine, we'd sort of shuffle them around, right? Like adjust as needed, the different where we place the money.
I wonder if you could have existing ones that you had let's just say a certain number that you would consider in a year, and some way to look at it where you could have some of them come back. My concern would be just to open up kind of Pandora's box on that one, and then just have everybody come running. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be something where they signed on at an earlier date and something wasn't as readily available as it is now, and then they're being punished for it in some way, shape, or form. But I still look at what the amount and the allure of signing up now. Part of that is having the money there to help others get some of these jobs done and do them well and keep structures up and available for others to see. And so I would hate to only focus on one area. So I would say I would be in favor of, yes, looking at existing ones, but probably putting some sort of at least like a 2-3 year limit, like trial run on just seeing what that looks like. And then we could always readdress at another point. And again, just thinking out loud and initial thoughts.
Any contrary opinions? Seems like a general. Okay. That's actually great direction for me. I'm happy to draft a couple of things that are basically trying to allow it and then trying to figure out some options. I mean, there's lots of ways we could go with that, right? We could talk about certain types of grants. I think this idea of like 2 per year or what have you, I can sketch some of those different things out, what the implications would be. Could be if you're at least 10 years old. I mean, the program's old enough now that we do have pretty old landmarks, some of which like I wish would come in for a grant, to be honest, when you're walking by them on the street.
Yeah.
There's like got the landmark plaque and then they don't look great. So yeah, okay, it's helpful.
And other items and just jumping back to the commercial side for a second, if there was again, we've talked about, do we have, I guess properties that we are more interested in than others? Could there be a higher percentage that's associated with target properties? A little bit on the commercial side especially. Just looking at items, ones that just are super, they're all rich in their history, but there's probably certain ones that would be, on a higher pedestal, I guess. And I could be wrong.
Just don't know how you could approve one for a certain amount, or I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, and it's fair enough.
We could ever do outreach to some, residential especially, right, that are either existing and, like you said, need some shoring up and maybe don't realize or would be incentivized to do that, or outreach to existing homes that are not landmarked, or even commercial, right? So I think it's still an appealing idea to me to try to get some structures in here that we have our eyes on.
I mean, on my end, I guess I was just thinking about, what was recently the Empire or something of that sort, structures like that I feel like, at least as long as I've been here, seem to have a little bit more of the slightly stronger pull. Another item I have a question about is just anything that has construction that's going on that we have put funds up for. Is there any way to, like I work for a construction company and we'll put a sign up in the front yard and at least advertise part of that, that there's something going on. There could be an informational one that goes with if you receive funds from us that you can understand that is available and get yourself out there a little bit more on some other front.
That's a work plan subcommittee. I think Gary and Linda or Gary and somebody might be on it. So check your work plan for your assignments.
Yeah. I think, was theirs more for like the DHA design on Main Street here? I forgot. The one that used to do the Waterloo. That one like has the signage, right? It's not up right now, I don't think, but it was, and that was great. So I thought that Linda, that the committee they're on is was more commercial oriented, but were you also mentioning for like residential as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of people who walk, I think it'd be a great
100%.
idea to do for residential. There's a lot of people who just walk around our downtown, all the amazing residential streets, and if they saw builders' signs that also said, promote our program, that could be really, really incentivizing.
I think, that being proactive about outreach and educating people about what programs are available has come up a bunch since I've started. And maybe it would be too crass, but it would be interesting if we could put like how much money the city has contributed towards projects out there in a way for people to see. Because I think people would be surprised. I don't think they have any idea, that this is going on.
Yeah, I'm happy. I think those are all great things for the subcommittee to look at. I think they are going to look at commercial and residential because 1040 Front was one of them, and I've gotten questions about that. That's a corner. It's huge. People are definitely interested. So I think that makes sense. I think the money thing could go either way. Like some people could be incentivized, and some people could be very mad.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think that's a great outreach concept. I do want to ask, because I'm personally curious, I've sort of wondered if there's a way on the commercial side, because I think the numbers are very different, right? The numbers of commercial buildings this is how I think of it. There are fewer commercial buildings, but if you lost a few of these commercial buildings, everybody in town would know, right? There would be a pretty big impact. The Empire, we can talk about the Empire because it actually is landmarked, right? So if it weren't landmarked and that sign came down, I think that would be a loss to the city, right? In many different ways. And so I think the commercial hits a little different, and because of the Main Street, and Front Street, of course, but the main downtown area. But at the same time, it's fewer numbers, right? And so I don't know if there's a way to create a targeted list. I don't know if that's something that we'd want to do, that we put into the code. I'm not really sure. I can look into that. I do think there's going to be, fairness issues. We'd probably have to come up with a whole separate set of criteria, right? We couldn't just use the landmark criteria. It'd have to be like the super landmark criteria or something, right? But I can explore that a little bit just to see what those numbers would look like, because I do think there are a couple that are left downtown that are not landmarked and that could go down at any minute, right? So to speak. I'm overemphasizing it. 6 months plus 1 minute is how it would go. Okay, so other things. Okay, we talked about existing landmarks, structural and restoration. I guess we hadn't seen those numbers before, what those projects cost. Is there anything that comes up that you want me to know or that you want me to look at, or more information, or anything on that specific path?
I think this was really helpful, Amelia, and really thorough, so thank you for doing this. I don't think I've seen numbers like these before. So just looking at your questions, I don't know if we skipped through this or I missed it, but do we want options for separate grants for structural and restoration? I don't have an answer other than I think that's worth considering, because when you do look at those numbers, those are big numbers for that work, for commercial and residential.
I also want to ask, it's my impression that the extraordinary circumstances conversations are difficult to navigate, and that we'd probably want to move away from that, maybe entirely, but at the very least, make it better. Is that right? Or do you all feel like those are that's functional language?
I think it's difficult. I don't know if we can just get away from it. I don't know there's a better way to evaluate. But it is, and it has been difficult discussions.
I think they're difficult too because it's the lack of clarity of how to proceed with those in the kind of sense that we're somewhat reinterpreting the code on the fly, and then sort of equity comes up, considerations of equity and use of funds. So I think, this would be, it'd be very beneficial to make things clearer and more straightforward. And would take a lot of kind of thought by our commission how to do that.
Yeah, I think my memory of the conversation at the retreat too was partly what's interesting about the restoration and structural is that you want to incentivize that, but also that those are often the things that cost the most. And so being able to peel those off can kind of clean up some of those conversations. I think it's valid to have hard conversations about big grants, right? I mean, those probably should be difficult to give one property owner $300,000, right? But on the other hand, it's this question of equity and how to apply this, consistently. And I think that actually so far, the last couple of years, it has been pretty consistent. But I think over the whole course since 2019, it's very easy for different staff members, different commissioners to interpret it differently. And I think that's where it gets really tricky. So, okay, so I'll continue on exploring that a little bit, but I appreciate the feedback. Okay, and then this is really just honestly from a workload perspective. I have this question. It's question number 3. I don't want to create a bunch of estimates or whatever. Try to make a better list for targeted landmarks if that's not helpful. So I'm just curious, having read a little bit of the context produced number for potential landmarks, and again, this would be to help us project like what the fund could support. Is there something, do you want me to pursue something more like, let's estimate 4 landmarks per year? Do you want to try to get to 75 landmarks? Like, is any of that resonant at all with how to plan for the future?
I think it would be helpful to target a number specifically, both commercially and residentially. 72, I don't know, is for a year. I think that's very reasonable. A couple commercial projects a year.
So am I remembering correctly that the current average is about 4 per year?
Right.
And is that just residential or just?
It's
involved
everything.
to everything?
Yeah, I think I took the last 5 years, but I took out 2020.
So like, one of the things I would say is because being proactive and incorporating an outreach strategy keeps coming up, then maybe we should target something a little bit more than the average if we actually mean to pursue that. Because this is sort of the reactive instead of proactive average, right?
Yeah, I think you're right as far as if we weren't trying to push or interested in pushing another lever, that'd be the way to go. But if you are trying to activate the other lever, it would be more.
I think what you wrote up about why using the stories in place was actually not the best way to consider landmarks was really helpful. And I think this conversation kind of reiterates that we've got other ways to think about what we'd like to landmark, where in Louisville, what type of properties, what type of commercial, things like that. So yeah, and I agree that I think 4 is a good base, 4 per year, but maybe level that up just a bit, knowing that we're trying to maybe do some outreach and promotion and increase grant amounts, which really could draw some people in.
I'll pick a number north of 4. No, but seriously, that's actually very helpful. Thank you. And I'm glad. Yeah, I was personally hopeful about the stories and places thing, but I really don't think it's helpful. So, okay. All right, what else? What else after reading this or hearing this do you want me to look at, or other information that you'd like to know? I heard better numbers adjusted for today's cost. I'll get you that. Okay.
I think you'll be doing it. Got plenty to do. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. That's all I had on that one.
I just had a question of, this has been, thank you for preparing all this. This has been a really valuable discussion. Where will this go next? Because there are some commissioners absent who might want an opportunity to participate in this discussion.
Yeah. Right. So I think with that in mind in particular, I probably will, I don't know, but maybe we'll do another discussion direction, but with actually some draft language to work with might be helpful. I mean, I don't want to drag this out like a ton, but my approach is I'm hopeful that seeing some of this early on, eventually once we get to the drafting stage, we'll just be able to kind of go quickly. I'd rather do it that way than show you a draft of something and you're like, well, where's the whatever, the restoration grant? You know what I mean? So I think it's worth it to have a couple discussion directions, even aside from the fact that we don't have a couple people here tonight who I think would be valuable to weigh in. So try what I'll do next.
Okay, so we'll move on to items from staff.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again because I have adorable pictures from the event on Monday. So I'm gonna belabor this. Okay, so just some general updates. Alteration certificates, we had 612 Jefferson has had like 3 alterations since it was originally approved for all sorts of interesting demo discovery things. So anyway, that was approved. It's sort of interesting actually. Basically, they had done sort of like a very sort of a small demo of the existing siding on the rear of the building, and they had based their whole alteration certificate request off of that one piece. But then when they actually pulled all of the siding off, the piece that they had happened to pull was a patch job, and all the other elevations were a totally different type of siding. So based on that, that's why they made the request. So anyway, I think this one eventually maybe can ask Andy to come back and give us like the soup to nuts version of what ended up happening, because this is a big residential project. They got a lot of money, and it's been totally an ongoing changing process. So it's kind of interesting to see. Anyway, that one was approved at subcommittee. 1006 Pine, they actually ended up coming back a few days later with a siding design change and then keeping that storage door, so that was released. So that was good result. Just for the, I heard from the property owner recently that he's actually now not gonna do any of that work, and they are just gonna patch and repair the siding, the existing siding. So if you are on Pine Street and you see that, just know that something's happening. But that's what they're approved to do what you all asked them to do after you place the stay. 510 Jefferson is a full scrape, and that was released at subcommittee because it's sort of hard to see here, but the building, it's like not even clear that any of the building is really left. And so the logic is this is like not eligible for landmarking just because you really can't tell that the building is even there. From the history of it, from what I can gather, it's possible that the very top of the roof might be the same. They might have raised it, but it's just a totally different building at this point. So the subcommittee released that. That's the first full scrape release at a subcommittee that I'm aware of, but I think you can tell from the pictures alone that it's a pretty extreme case. Downtown Vision Plan open house is this Thursday. If you're available, please come. I don't know that they're going to be doing another survey or anything. This might be the last sort of big community engagement push. So it is over at the Rec Center. And so, yeah, after the meeting, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that or during the meeting if you want an update. But that's happening on Thursday. Next regular meeting is in June. And then these are our adorable pictures. I think these are both from Linda. I know Josh also sent me some too. So we're also going to be posting. I'm not going to be doing it, thank God. Somebody else is going to be posting these on social media as well because they're so cute because the sun was so beautiful. It was adorable. And also, we had like 25, 30 people come, which was really cool for one of our events. So it was really exciting.
Can I still send you some photos?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, anybody else who has any photos, please send. But yeah, especially because I do eventually want to give them to the property owners. And so I think you have a couple of them that nobody else has. Cool. Okay, that's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And any updates from commission members?
The only thing I have is that I attended the most recent Historical Museum Advisory Board meeting. And I gave them updates on the landmarking ceremony, because that was sort of the most relevant piece of news at the time from us. And they did presentations they have a part-time, I don't remember her title. She's an archivist, I think, in background about, their collections management program and everything that they're doing over there, but nothing super relevant to what we're doing.
Any other updates, commissioners? No?
I'd make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Do you roll call? Do you know? I waited last time I missed the roll call. I was we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kate.
Thing that you all need. I know you've heard about this from me a number of times, and also you got that direct email for you all. Please do send it out, since what the email sort of said is true. Like, you guys are the ones who are the best ambassadors for